Good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Hi, this is Steve in Dallas, and today we're discussing life on the road on Light Talk.
Now, this is David, broadcasting from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
Happy birthday to us.
Whose birthday is it?
I don't know. I just felt like saying that.
I thought I missed
You were
the
so
birthday.
you were so celebratory, and that we're still the Lumen Brothers. I thought it sounded like a birthday
No,
message.
not a birthday. Hey, I just got back into town, guys. Guess where I
I
was?
was Alaska.
Yes, while you two were slaving with those students, I was enjoying with my feet
Baked
up. I was
Alaska.
in the spa, enjoying.
Baking in the spa in
I
Alaska.
was baking in the spa. I took the inward passage up through Juneau and Glacier Bay, and it was just mind-boggling. It was great. Some of the most beautiful skies I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah,
I took
it's
tons
true.
of photos. I will use them, I'm sure, in shows. Incredible colors. If anyone you want to check them out, you go onto my Facebook site under my name, and I've got a bunch of photos there. But it is just amazing lighting. The lighting up there is just beautiful. So I highly recommend it. You know, I've been all around the world, and now this is the most beautiful spot I've ever seen, and that is Glacier Bay in Alaska.
It's a good thing we bought it.
Yeah, right. And we could have had Greenland too.
Well, they called it Seward's Folly, and people said he was crazy to buy it from Russia, but I think he made a darn good decision.
Amazing. It really is beautiful. So
It's
highly
incredible.
recommend. So anyway, welcome everyone to episode 128, or as we lovingly call it, our Ugly Americans Working Overseas episode. Due to the amount of questions sent in by our listeners about working overseas, we decided for this week to put our Let's Talk About Ducks on vacation so we can fit in a couple more questions, which would be great. However, we have a brand new segment that we are introducing today, and it is quite apropos for this episode. As you may know, we have over 115 countries and territories that listen to Light Talk, and periodically we announce the new countries that have recently joined our family. And a few episodes ago, Stan was giving me a hard time for not fully researching these countries and territories. Damn, I couldn't even pronounce the names correctly. So we decided to introduce this brand new segment. So today we present Professor Stan's Neighborhood. Hey, do you like that song, guys? Wasn't that great?
And that was pretty cool. I kind of sound somewhat familiar.
No. Just that blast at the end sounds familiar. So anyway, so Stan, why don't you tell our listeners about our new country that has joined the Light Talk Network?
Okay, well, I've been working hard on getting my head around Kyrgyzstan. Now, you got to say that now there's a whole bunch of stands in the world that, and I didn't even know. Once upon a time, I wondered why my name was at the end of all of these countries. And I discovered that Stan actually means land of the Kyrgyz, land of the Tajiks, land of the Uyghurs. So and I guess I have ancestry, and I do have ancestry from that part of the world. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Kyrgyzstan.
Well, wait a second. Aren't you land of the K?
I am. I'm land of K.
You
could look at it that way. You could look at it that way. But actually, my some of my ancestors came from Western Russia, and not too far from Central Asia, which is where Kyrgyzstan is, not to be confused with Kazakhstan. Kyrgyzstan is located in Central Asia, just on the eastern edge of China, north of Tajikistan and south of Kazakhstan. They have a beautiful 40-rayed yellow sun in the center of their flag to represent the 40 tribes that once made up the entirety of the Kyrgyz culture before the intervention of Russia during the Soviet Union. They became part of Russia, and then in 1991, they became their own country. And the capital is Bishkek. Okay, which is Bishkek, right, which is where it is. And it's a beautiful mountainous country with lush valleys and arid plains. The pictures I looked at are just stunning. The population today is a precise 6,359,500.
Wow.
And about a third of the country is always covered in snow. It's quite beautiful. And I'm very pleased and honored that there are people there who are downloading us and listening to us in beautiful Kyrgyzstan. And it's on my list now of places to visit.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, Stan. And that concludes this week's episode of Professor Stan's Neighborhood. So Steve has our first question.
And this comes from Ming Lee in Hong Kong. And Ming Lee says, how did you get started working abroad? Well, I was in college, and a ballet company came touring through my university. It was the end of their season, and it turned out that their technical director was leaving the company. And they asked me if I would like to be the technical director for the upcoming season. And I said, sure. And I got with this ballet company. We did 3 national tours, and then we did a tour of Northern Europe. So all of a sudden, I was in the right place at the right time. And someone asked me if I could do this. And so then I'm off and out the door doing it. And that kind of preparing for 3 national tours and then a tour of Europe prepared me for more complex work. So really for me, my career overseas has been, so much of it is tied to dance. My first show that I designed that I was on the road with was in mainland China. And since then, I've been in about 37 countries. I think it's really difficult to find a job overseas. You just have to keep your head to the ground and see what's going on. I have noticed, I mean, it may not help you in Hong Kong, there is a magazine called Art Search in North America, and Art Search lists jobs in it. And every now and then I'll see a job, particularly a dance company, that says we are taking a tour overseas and we're looking for a lighting supervisor, a costume supervisor. But that's one way, is to look at the publications. And from your point of view, since you're in Hong Kong, I would start making the circuit with the predominant theater and dance and ballet companies, the opera companies that you know of that are probably on a financial tour, a financial tier, that they are taking shows from Hong Kong into the Pacific Rim or into Europe or into North America. And I would go by and interview and show them your interest in working with them abroad. How did you get started, David?
I got started while I was still a third-year grad student. And again, it's exactly what you said, Steve. It's being at the right place at the right time. I was at the League show, which was sort of like the clam bake, but a lot more extensive. And my panel was looking at my work, and we were talking about it. And Neil Jampoulos said, "What are you doing next week?" I said, "Well, I'm going back to school." He goes, "No, you're not. You're coming with me to Caracas. We're doing a new opera there, and I need someone to handle all the projections." And I've told this story before, but I won't bore people with it again. But it's really the directors and designers who are going to be hiring you to go over to Europe. Because, after I did that show, I did most of my shows in the United States. And it wasn't until like 15 years later that I met Paul Curran, who are doing a show here, actually, in the United States. And Paul said, "Hey, what are you doing in January?" And I said, "Well, I have January open right now." He says, "Great, you're going to be designing a show at La Scala with me." Now, that was amazing because that was my first European show. But it comes down to the directors. If the directors are working in Europe, you're going to be working in Europe. That's just the way it is.
The other thing that Ming Lee might do, since she's listening to us, is one would assume she has a pretty good understanding of English. I would go down to the Arts Council in Hong Kong or the booking agents who are booking, American shows into that neck of the world and say, I could be a translator for these companies. There's all kinds of ways to open doors for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Also, check out the Facebook groups. And I've seen in both the Lighting Designers group and the USA 829 Designers group, questions from designers saying, "Hey, I'm doing a show in Poland. Do you know any assistants that know Polish?" Right? And we're going to be talking about this in a later question. It's true. If you know a language, then you've immediately made yourself marketable. And that's another way to get over there. You get over there as an assistant first to a designer who works in Europe. And that's the thing you do. Find out who's working overseas. Write them an email. Say, I know Italian, I know German. If you ever need an assistant, then I'm the person to do it. And that way you get over there and you meet the people and you meet directors, you meet assistant directors. And those assistant directors will probably like you and get to know you and want to work with you. That's how it works. Our next question is from Tom from Miami. Hey, my hometown. And Tom asks, how have you survived given the language barrier or just the different schedule and ways of how the theater operates? Well, okay. When I first went to Europe, I didn't know any foreign languages. I knew Spanish. I knew Spanish pretty okay. It was okay because I grew up in Miami. You have to learn Spanish. But I didn't know Italian. And of course, I realized that there was going to be a language issue. So the first thing I did was I called, believe it or not, Ming Cho Lee. And I said, do you have any students or can you make any recommendations for any assistants that may be in Italy? And he had a former student that he knew and led me on to, and I called him up, and he was fantastic. He was actually a Dutch man, and he became my assistant on the show, and he was fantastic. Now, over the years, I've picked up a lot of the language. Obviously, I know the numbers, and that's the first thing you should do. It doesn't take long to learn the numbers because you're going to be calling out numbers, right? You're going to be calling out numbers to set light cues. You should learn the terminology in that language for save, for record as, things like that. Focus, all your focus commands, you should learn the language. That will go a long, long, long way. I think that's really a smart thing to do. And believe it or not, after a while, you meet everybody and you sort of pick it up. But if you know a language, if you know that gives you an advantage. It really, really does. So if you're in school right now, learn Italian, learn Spanish, right? Learn French. Go ahead, use that time. You're in school. You're not going to be working for a few years. Why not? Why not use an elective and do that? That's one thing I always tell my students if they want to work internationally. How about you, Steve?
Well, it's interesting you talk about the language barrier. I'm sitting here looking at a book, and it's called Theater Words, and it's published by the Nordic Theater Union. And you can find these online on eBay. They're not hard to find. It is theater terms, and it is in 9 languages. So English, French, Spanish, Italian, German, Czech. There's a number, Russian. There's a number of languages here. So you can find a word, and you find that word for list or load in, and then you can go right across the page here and find the words in those appropriate languages. The thing that's kind of nice about the book is it has 20 or 30 pages of simply drawings. So I can turn to a page here and point to a screwdriver, and maybe they'll understand that I want a screwdriver. And then finally, it's just kind of common phrases in the back of the book. What I do is I take a piece of paper, 8.5 by 11, and whatever country I'm going to be working in, on the front of it, I put in all my information that I need as a lighting designer. And that's phrases, record this, cut and paste, focus it here, focus it there, soft, hard, whatever. And then on the back side, I have numbers and colors again. So like David, I'm not too bad at Spanish, living in Texas, and so I can kind of get by. Though the National Theater one day, the production manager turned to me and in perfect English, he said, shut up, just speak English. You're giving me a headache. You sound like a baby talking to me. So language is a big deal. And, you shouldn't be trying to teach someone in, Czechoslovakia English.
I haven't done much work overseas like these guys have in theater, but I do remember we had a company come to the States, and the person who brought the company in did not want to spring for a translator. So we had this entire company that we were hosting, and no one could speak the native language. And that was really an obstacle. It should have been kind of like thought about, right? Like, how are we going to handle that? And that was kind of made things really frustrating and awkward, and we didn't want to be insulting. So we ended up finding somebody who spoke that language and getting them in the theater to help us out, because it was really a bit of an embarrassment.
But understand something. This is something that I learned from Paul, because Paul used to be an interpreter and a translator, and there's a difference between those two terms. All right, you need to have somebody, whoever's interpreting or translating for you, you need to have someone who knows theatrical terms. So you really need someone from a theatrical background, which is why I hired this young man from Italy, because he was a designer. He was a lighting designer. He knows what the terminology is.
Right.
So be careful if the theater says, oh, no, we have somebody that we hire to come in to do this for guests. If they're not theater technicians, you're going to have issues. So the good companies already know that, and they will make sure that a theater technician will be your interpreter. Okay. The second part of this question has to do with adjusting to work schedules and different traditions of the theater, working traditions. I always do this when I ever go to a new theater, whether it's in the United States or Europe, but it's especially important in Europe, is to meet with the master electrician or whoever the house lighting designer is privately before you start work. Obviously, to introduce yourself, to be grateful, to be humble. Right? Don't come in there with an attitude. One thing I always say, and it's true, I am honored to be working in this theater, in your theater. And I know this is your home, so I want to make this as easy as possible for you and the crew. I have no problem adjusting. So these are very, very important things that you make that connection. And a lot of it has to do also with language, obviously. But there is a culture in every single theater, a work culture. I remember one of my first experiences in Europe is that we went on break at 10 o'clock in the morning and they never came back from break. And I learned, instead of getting mad, I said, okay, there must be a reason. I'm going to go out and have lunch.
I will see your 10 a.m. and raise you. I was trying to get a show into the theater, and I was worried about the schedule because it said load-in starts at 10.
Right.
And David's absolutely right. I showed up at 10, and what 10 a.m. meant was, let's have a cup of coffee for 15 minutes.
Right.
Let's have a cigarette. Let's see that light plot. Let's have a little conversation.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it wasn't a wasted 15 or 20 minutes. It was a chance for me to get to know the master electrician to get to know me. And then we were off and running. But if you just go in there and say, what, you're taking a damn break? That is the wrong thing to come out of your mouth at 10 a.m.
Right, exactly. And understand that if you are from the United States, chances are you're kind of high strung. We're under time pressure all the time because our theaters are not owned by the state. And, we're not used to working from 8 o'clock in the morning to 12 at night and then having a midnight crew come in to do work. That's what happens at La Scala and a lot of large opera companies. So they are a lot more laid back. There will be time to get your show up. I don't freak out anymore. Remember, you're in the theater for, 4 to 6 weeks. You're not in the theater for 10 days. So your show will be fine. Do not be stressed out. That's the best advice I could give anyone when it comes to dealing with the culture in Europe.
Monique from Paris asks, can you discuss how you prep to travel abroad and what do you pack? I don't do that much work abroad, but I do travel. So I'm just going to answer this question with 2 words, Rick Steves. You're just going to go to the Rick Steves website. He has a show on PBS. He's got all the packing tips there are that are just wonderful. And I'll just confess that I am a reformed overpacker. So I used to pack way too much. And lately we are using Rick Steves' tips and tricks about packing. And they have made a miraculous difference in our traveling light. So that's in terms of like personal stuff. In terms of like lighting stuff specifically, I'm going to leave it to you guys because you do it more often than I do.
Well, some of the things overlap. Passport, visa. Understand if you're working overseas, you need a visa. All right, so don't forget about that. Copies of your contract, power converters, because we deal with a certain type of plug and they're different in Europe. Your meds, your medications, and extra meds. Meds that you may not know that you need yet, like antibiotics. If you have severe jet lag, like I do, your favorite type of sleeping help. I take Ambien. A lot of people don't like Ambien. There's a lot of people have very bad reactions to Ambien. But if you don't, Ambien saved my career. Absolutely saved my career.
Something that we do that's really important is you should register with the United States Department of State whenever you go overseas, because they will contact you if there's any concerns in that country, and they will help expatriate you if necessary. So that's something that you could do. It doesn't cost anything, and then your government knows where you are, and it's probably a good thing. It's helped us when we've traveled. We'll get a notification that there's a demonstration in a particular part of town. It might be violent. You might want to stay away. It's a really smart thing to do.
Right. Also, get one of these global entry cards. It's great. It's very inexpensive. You basically have to sign all your civil rights away so the FBI and CIA can look into your past. But it saves a lot of time, especially in customs. Very important.
I would say there's something that you brought up, but you left out.
What's that?
You said take a passport with you.
Yes.
It's not enough to take your passport. If you lose your passport overseas, it could be 2 weeks before you can get a new passport. So if you, and of course you have to take your passport, take a copy with you. If you have a photostatic copy of your passport, the American Embassy can cut you a new passport in 12 hours. But if they have to contact Washington, it can be up to 2 weeks, which is a long, long time.
It's a good point. Rick Steves would tell you to take a picture of your passport.
Yep, that's what I do.
And put it on a cloud somewhere too, which I have ours on Dropbox, so it could be accessed from any computer anywhere in the world.
Well, chances are, if you're working in Europe, you had to go through the visa process. You've taken several pictures of that page of your passport, but you're right. You got to have that on you just in case.
I would say take 2 bags with you.
Yes.
I do not check luggage. I rarely check luggage domestically, but I certainly don't check luggage internationally.
Yeah.
The last time I checked luggage, I was flying into mainland China on, I think it was British Air, and I went to China and my luggage went to Singapore.
Yep.
Now, the only thing that was nice about that was when I got off the airplane, the British Air was standing there and with a $200 in their hand saying, "Here's for the inconvenience. We'll have your luggage for you tomorrow." But that luggage could also be 3 weeks away. So I carry a carry-on bag, and I carry a shoulder bag, and that is it. I never let my luggage out of my sight. And the last thing I would recommend is you need to go ahead and convert $100 into the local currency. So when you hop off the airplane, you can actually take a cab. You can actually buy a sandwich.
Right. And make sure that you use a credit card that does not charge a foreign transaction fee. Capital One, all their credit cards don't do that. So, and that you can get that for free. Okay. Diane from London asks, what income and tax preparations do you need to consider? Is it worth to hire an international agent? Yes, it is worth it for me to hire an international agent. And there are a lot of tax preparations that you have to deal with. Now, I'm going to talk about tax treaties for a second. Many of our friends overseas have tax treaties with the United States. And what that means is that they have agreed not to deduct Social Security taxes from your paychecks, knowing that you're going to claim that in the United States. And it works the other way around, too. When people come over here, up until recently, they have not had to worry about the United States taking taxes out of their paychecks. Now, this has changed recently because we have some people in Washington who see this as lost revenue. I'm not going to get into that because that has to do with politics. So what you have to do in order to make sure that they don't take money out of your paycheck is you have to fill out 2 very important forms. The first form is a certification of U.S. tax residency. It's actually from the U.S. Department of Treasury. It's Form 6166. And of course, in their own crazy way, in order to get one of these, you have to fill out Form 8802. But it's basically a letter stating that you are a resident of the United States for that tax year. The second form is a certificate of coverage from the Social Security Administration, and you can apply for this online, which is at ssa.gov. This is for free. You just fill it out online, but again, leave several months for this. This is probably the most important letter, and they will basically send you this letter that basically says that you do pay Social Security and you'll pay it to the United States. But in both cases, you've got to apply for these forms at least 90 days before you leave. If you don't have these forms and they're not dated for the year that you're working in that country, they will take out up to 30% of your fee, and you may never see that again. Very, very, very important.
You know, the other thing that I do is when I handle payment. I set up an account in the States and have direct deposit from my client in Europe pay my bank in the States.
Absolutely. I do that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
The time I didn't do that, all of a sudden I had a fanny pack with $10,000 in it, wondering how many people knew there was $10K in my fanny pack as I walked through the streets back to my hotel. And I thought, never going to do that again.
No, that's
never.
Yeah. Especially in Naples. You don't want to do that in Napoli. But one more thing about an international agent, because I'm so strong about that. My agent knows all these great places to stay. And by the way, it's different in overseas in most cases than it is in the United States, unless you're working in London. You're responsible, not the theater, for paying your travel and lodging expenses. So my agent knows all the good places to stay. So he comes up and says, hey, I got you this place. It's going to cost you 80 euros a day. Is that going to work for you? And absolutely, or not, or whatever. But it's close to the theater. He understands what my needs are. So that's a huge, huge help. Also, there are many Americans who work in Italy that in their contracts, it says that the theater has up until a year to pay you. That's right. You heard that correctly. I have found that working with this agent, I get paid a lot quicker than a year. If you don't have an agent, you're going to have some issues. I highly suggest it.
Well, I mean, the sad thing about us, as in everybody, human beings, when is the last time you actually read the contract? I mean, you walk into the phone store and you buy a phone, there's a 15-page contract. You just sign your name at the end of it. We're not a race of people anymore who read the fine print.
Yeah, pay a translator for that. If you get a contract from Europe and it's in Italian and you don't know how to read Italian, pay someone to read it for you. Do not sign anything until you know exactly what it says.
We have Jean from Green Bay, and Jean says, what do you look for in an international assistant? Well, Jean, it's going to be easy. I'm looking for the same things in an international assistant that I'm looking for in a domestic assistant. I want someone who's organized. I want someone who knows how to listen and then act, so they can be out there and be my spokesman when things are happening. I certainly want them to understand the language of the theater. So if I'm taking an American with me, then I want them to be fluent in the language much more so than I am. But I actually, these days, ask for the theater to provide an assistant for me. And I think that does two things. They're going to show me where all the great restaurants are, but also that assistant is trusted by the theater and by the producer. So I'm already, I think, in good stead with the theater company, because here comes so-and-so into the theater that they all know and have had drinks and dinner with and whatever. I want someone to be pleasant. I want someone to understand the kind of rules of the road if we're touring around the country. But I mean, it's not terribly different. I'm looking for the best person I can have with me, someone I can have dinner with, have a pleasant conversation, and know they're going to get the job done. What about you, David? Do you take an assistant or do you have one provided?
I take a second assistant. I usually take one of my students as a second assistant, and I do exactly what you do. The theater usually supplies an assistant for me. Sometimes it's their resident lighting designer. Which is fine, which I have no problem with. I have, I love these people. They've actually been some very friendly, good people that I've met who happen to be, designing shows there, and they can help me because they know the theater. I sent them the plot, and I said, you really don't want to hang that light up from that second cove. I know that the plan looks like you're going to make the shot, but you're not going to get like 2 feet further upstage of the plasma line. Thank you. You know how much time that saved me? Another thing that the theater assistant will do for you is to save you time and give you the knowledge of unfamiliar equipment that the theater may own. There have been several instances where I wanted a certain effect, and I knew a light that was manufactured in the United States, but I wasn't familiar with all the lights they had in the theater, and I just told the house designer the effect I wanted, and that house designer would say, well, we do have these lights that will work really well for that. So they are a very valuable resource for information.
Well, we had a little drama in one of the theaters I was in where the set, it's nobody's fault. Well, I guess it was somebody's fault. The set was just in the wrong place. It was off by a couple feet. And it was a 2-story set. And this was bad when we got to focus. And my assistant came up to me and he said, this is going to be really ugly. Why don't you go back to the hotel and have a little nap? and will call you when the set is in the right place. And I mean, it was completely stress-free. He stayed there, and because you're right, he was part of the theater company. He went through the horrible, horrible ugliness of all that. And 3 or 4 hours later, he called me and said, you come back to the theater in 45 minutes. We're ready for you.
You are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers, and this week, Light Talk is sponsored by...
We have a public service announcement from No More, 10 out of 12s. It's no secret that my career takes me on the road. And like most lighting designers, I like living la vida loca.
Ooh.
But I can't always enjoy the crazy life. Back home on our little ranch up near the territories, my 2 girls are all alone, and I worry about their safety. We thought about a dog, but what to get? A shepherd? A pit bull? A Doberman? And then, when doing a concert in Puerto Rico, I found the perfect little guard puppy. We named her Fernell. And now, 3 years later, my wife and daughter are protected by our loving, mischievous, tightly wound chupacabra.
What?
These days, Fernell is 40 pounds of fangs, claws, and love. My wife adores Fernell because her gray, hairless, leather-like body never sheds on the sofa. My daughter loves to take her on afternoon walks and watch Fernell run down a coyote, the local bully, or the UPS truck. And as Emma says, that's when the fun begins. Never a finicky eater, I let Fernell out around midnight, and 2 hours later she comes home exhausted and covered in blood, ready to curl up at the foot of my daughter's bed. Now I can go on the road secure in the knowledge that just a few feet from my sleeping daughter, Fernell is on guard, making little growling noises, ready to rip an intruder's face clean off if disturbed. Just ask our housekeeper. This has been a public service announcement from No More, 10 out of 12s.
And now, back to Light Talk.
That's good. Abib from Senegal asks, are there ever opportunities to move and be based in a foreign country? Well, absolutely. I mean, this has happened to many of my friends. It's funny. I mean, you go to some of these places and say, I could live here. And you meet the right people, maybe you end up there. It's a wonderful opportunity. I must say, I've been blessed in the opportunities I've had to work in Europe, because there have been dozens of places I've looked at and said, I could live here. Like, I could live in Spain, even though it's totally insane. I mean, the government, what's left of it, is really not that functional. But what a beautiful, beautiful country. And the people are just fabulous. We all have our different opinions. I love the Far East. I've worked in Tokyo, in Hong Kong, in Beijing, a lot of places. I don't know if I want to live in Beijing, but there are so many wonderful places.
I have a good friend who 30 years ago was making a name as a costume designer in the film industry. And he was on location shooting in Morocco. And he fell in love with the place. And he realized that as a costume designer, he could live in Morocco. He could open up a design studio and construction shop. And that's what he has done for the last 30 years. He is incredibly active around the world, but he is based out of Morocco. And he has a whole team there, and it's just what he fell in love with.
Yep.
I think with Abib, the question, David brings up a good question, and that is, are you comfortable? Where would you be comfortable in the world? Where in the world is there going to be a support mechanism for you? Where in the world is there going to be opportunities? It's a huge adventure. I think if I were going to relocate, I would probably relocate to Asia. But I don't know. Good question. Hard decisions.
I think we know where Stan wants to go.
Where?
Denmark?
I think I want to spend a month in various places for the next 5 years, and then figure out where I want to settle down.
Yeah.
I would go, truthfully, of all the places I've been so far, in terms of the vibe, it's still Hawaii for me.
Mm.
Now, you've worked in a couple of different countries, consulting and helping with museums. What were those experiences like?
Well, my first museum one was Valencia, Spain, back to David's point, which I really did like. I would love to have seen Barcelona, but I didn't. I've been to the UK, I've been to Oxford, I've been to Sweden, and now I've traveled around. It was like what you guys said. It was just It wasn't all that different than the descriptions that you made. Getting used to an hour and a half, 2 hour lunch in the middle of the day, right, was a different cultural experience than working until 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, having very late dinners. It was. I think the big difference and I think David pointed it out earlier, and you did too, Steve. It's more relaxed. The contrast for me is we are really a high-strung nation. It really is true. And what really struck me when I came back, I did some work in Tasmania, which is at the bottom of the world. I also did some work in Singapore. When I got back to the States after my first really big sort of around the world thing, what struck me, this is going to sound strange, when I got back to the airport in the U.S., like CNN is on all the screens. And if you don't pay attention to the words and you just sort of like feel the vibe, it was like, be afraid, be afraid. It was sort of like the energy was so frenetic compared to what I had gotten used to in other countries. So I think there was something to be said for a more relaxed vibe, both in Asia, in Australia, in Europe. And I really enjoyed the Netherlands. But actually, people in the Netherlands, when I talked about retiring there, they said, you should go to the Azores. So I've been looking at the Azores as a place to visit, which are Spanish islands.
No matter where you decide to go, before you decide to go, talk to a tax expert, because taxes are handled totally differently depending on, if you're going to be a citizen, dual citizen, or whatever. You got to really be careful about that.
Well, you could move to one of those stand countries.
Yeah, the stand countries. So Steve has our final question of the day.
And this is Angie in Seattle. And Angie asks, how do you handle problems and disasters in the theater when working overseas? All right.
Carefully.
Disasters out of the theater, that's the real problem.
So 3 words for you, Angie. Pick your battle. You can have one hissy fit the entire time you're there, so save it in your back pocket. You can use obscene language one time, save that in your back pocket. Oh, that brings up a good point. When working overseas, obscene language is really considered obscene. It's here we use it as a verb, a noun, or prepositional phrase in a sentence. This is just not true overseas. And I think if every third word out of your mouth is blue, your credibility tanks really fast. So when you do get upset and a curse word comes out, they go, wow, Angie's really upset. We need to do something about this. So one hissy fit, one battle, and just roll with the punches on everything else. Also, understand these people are under pressure. Probably half of the people in the crew have no idea what you're saying. My Spanish is not bad, but I was in Mexico City and I wanted to change a gel from an amber to a chocolate. And I said, I need a piece of chocolate. And the crew kind of looked at me and, they said, well, that can wait. And, a couple of minutes later, I said, I really need some chocolate. And, this went on for 5 or 6 minutes. And finally, the master electrician walked over and said, listen, I know you're hungry, but we have to get finished. You can't have any chocolate. And then I explained to him what chocolate was and showed him the gel book, and there was a great laugh, and everyone thought it was wonderful. Then all afternoon, people were going, I want a piece of chocolate. But keep in mind, most people have no idea what you're saying to them either.
Right.
And simply being frustrated with them, how would you feel if someone just yelled at you in French?
No.
And then they yelled a little louder because you were too stupid to understand it the first time. So be a little careful about disasters and problems.
Yeah, remember you're a guest in their theater, and Steve is absolutely right, because I was my first show in Europe, especially in Italy, and blue words are coming out of my mouth. I was told, the crew doesn't really appreciate that, and that's when I realized that. I said, oh, you're right. I'm not in the United States, and it's true, especially in a place like Italy where it's very religious.
I'll just add, it's even true here, because I grew up in the Northeast and using harsh language is common and considered normal. And in the Midwest, at least I don't know about where Steve is in Texas, but where I lived, it was not well received at all. And even where I am now in the South, depending upon where you are, I have really kind of curtailed that language as much as I can.
You know, I was in Portugal, and my assistant, we were doing something in the theater, and she spoke no Portuguese. And when things were going well, she would look at the crew and give them the okay sign.
Oh, be careful.
And after a while, one of them came up to me and said, "We're working really hard. Why does your assistant keep calling us the asshole?"
Yep, I've heard that one. That's right. In South America, that's the case
That's
too, right?
right. Be careful what you say and what you show. That's great. Hey, guys, we're out of time. So thanks for all that information. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate it, especially the young ones who are trying to get over there. So again, try to make connections, find designers and directors who work in Europe. Well, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again, you've spent another morning listening to us on Light Talk. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests and listen to us on your favorite podcast network, including Spotify, TuneIn, Google, and now we're even on livedesignonline.com. livedesignonline.com. And be sure to follow us on our Facebook group page. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast.
And always remember that if you choose to litigate us, our law firm of Flock, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we discuss poor eyesight, toasty cable, and why are there so many damn gel colors?
All of that and a new sponsor. Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
So long.